Welcome to Paranormal M, where each episode delves into the mysterious and the macabre. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest haunting stories. Enjoy the spine-chilling excitement. The Howlings. My personal experience. Something strange and inexplicable happened to me once during my school days. The school I attended used to do a lot of community work, which they called social action or social work. Went with my class to one of these activities in the countryside, not far from the city where I live. I stayed for a week sleeping and working in a town, living a lot with the farmers who lived there. The town had many stray dogs, which often gathered near us when we ate. The dogs were very surly. They came close but not too far away and always looked at us in the eyes, which seemed quite strange to me, because a very common characteristic of dogs is precisely that. Well, but they don't make much eye contact. Really. One day while we were digging a trench, a dog came out from the bottom of the hole, as if he had been buried alive there. He shook himself and he was gone. We were all perplexed, trying to explain the situation to each other. Most likely somebody had buried him. But why? Later that day, we talked about what happened with one of the townspeople, to which we received no response, simply a warning. They told us to never ever look the dogs in the eyes, because they're apparently reincarnated souls of the damned of their town, and that they would try to take our bodies if we maintained eye contact. They also told us that the dogs never died, that they'd been in the town for decades. They can't die. They're condemned to suffer eternally. They ended by saying that every night at the full moon, the dogs went out at 3 a.m. to howl at the moon, to ask it to allow them to rest in peace. The thing is in my country, the 20th century was full of conflict, like many others in Latin America. But specifically, when a president died in 1969, the entire country, mainly the religion in which this town is located, was like convulsed. His unusual death caused many peasants to take up their weapons and start killing each other. Because of all of that violence, there are many events full of blood and hatred that took place in these places. They were forgotten over time. Even so, we all thought they were kidding. They just wanted to scare us because we were city dwellers who showed up there. Coincidentally, the last day of our stay would be a full moon night. We decided among some of us who would be there to stay awake to find out if the story was really real, or if it was just an invention to scare us. That night we stayed awake talking and telling horror stories, lots of silly and funny ones at the end. And as the hours passed, many of us who were there fell asleep. In the end, it was me and a few others who were there. I had my watch and I kept checking the time all the time to see if it was already 3 a.m. The hours passed. The only light there was that of the moon. It was entering through the window. I remember very well how I raised my arm to see the time. It marked 3 o'clock. I stayed quietly waiting. When it seemed like nothing was going to happen, a dog started howling at the door of the room that we were in. That dog was joined by another, then another and another. We realized there were dozens of different howls coming from all directions. They were heard so loudly and so close that you couldn't even hear your own thoughts. And something I forgot to add to this is that the room we were in was a school classroom, but since it was a town with few resources, the classroom led directly to the street. So we weren't really somewhere far away, but rather in the middle of the howling. The dogs seemed to be moving in the same direction. They were all going toward the cemetery. It was close to the place where we were sleeping. After about 15 minutes, the dogs, who seemed to have arrived at their destination, all began to howl in unison, as if they had prepared a choreography for the audience that they had the night. Well, they kept up several howls. That was until a few minutes they began to quiet down little by little, one by one, till there's only one left, and then none. I was perplexed, couldn't speak, think, or move. I don't know if the others had stayed awake during the entire show or had fallen asleep, or if they were the same as me. I decided to stay awake to see if it would happen again, but the dogs didn't even bark the rest of the night. That day I was left with more questions than answers, and until now, years later, I still hear everything as if it had happened recently. One day I plan to return to that place. Only then I'll have part of the story. My roommate scared me. I'm not sure what happened that night. So when I was in high school, I lived in a dorm. It was during my exams. I was the last one to leave the study hall around 12:30 a.m. Went to my room and I was prepping to go to bed. We had a nightlight and I had a habit of reading the Bible before I sleep. I usually kneel comfortably, facing the pillows, and right beside me was my roommate, deep in sleep. I could see her face, but it wasn't really too bright. I was reading to myself, not reading it out loud, and maybe after a couple of minutes she suddenly opened her eyes and just staring dead in the eyes. I could sense that she opened her eyes through my peripheral vision. I stopped reading. I looked at her in surprise, and she suddenly pointed her hand at me and started speaking a different language. It sounded like gibberish. I was just looking at her in shock, trying to think of what to do. She started speaking more aggressively in that gibberish language. I got scared. I called her name twice and told her to stop doing whatever she's doing, or else I'm going to report her to her sister. It was a Catholic dorm. She wouldn't stop. I shook her hand, and she slowly put her hand down and closed her eyes. I tried calling her again, but she didn't respond. I literally prayed with my eyes open that day, and I couldn't sleep. Next day, first thing in the morning, I reported it to the sister. She told me to keep an eye on her. But honestly, I was so scared to even sleep beside her. I asked her if she remembered what happened, and she said that she doesn't. She got sick the next day, and this happened, and she got worse within that week. The parents were called, and she was sent home. I still don't understand what happened that night, but it was the scariest moment of my life. I thought maybe she was asleep and just sleep-talking, but never saw her doing that. The whole atmosphere just felt very weird and scary. We had a lot of stories to talk about in the dorm because every now and then something scary always happened. The fathers would visit to pray and sprinkle holy water during rounds. Scary experience many years ago still haunts me. When I was 11 years old in the early 1980s, I had an experience so remarkable that I remembered very often still to this day. I'm in my early 50s now. It was a Friday evening. We had visitors, so I wanted to impress them with my pet mouse. The mouse just happened to be small and of the brown variety. Sometime during the night, the mouse slipped out of my hands and escaped under the cabinets in the kitchen. I looked for a long time that evening, never caught the mouse. Sometime in the evening, I fell asleep on the couch in the living room. It was very common for a family to stay up late watching TV on Friday evenings. It was very common for my mother to leave me asleep, undisturbed on the couch. At approximately 3 or 4 in the morning, I woke up, and as I raised off the couch, I could see a small white mouse running around the kitchen floor. The living room and the kitchen were joined. I was very excited, believing I was finally going to catch the mouse. But oddly though, I knew it wasn't my mouse because of the color, yet I was compelled to follow this mouse around trying to catch it, all the while kind of believing that it was my mouse. I would get close and almost catch the mouse, but it would always step out of reach. After several minutes of this, I realized I was now back in the living room near the front door. As the mouse got closer to the front door, I saw it swing wide open, by itself. I even thought I knew the mouse was incapable to open this door. I knew it had. At this point, I was determined, so I followed the mouse out the front door, across the front of her house, and then down the side of the house. About midway to the back of the yard, I became, ferried. That's when I realized I was being trapped. Something terrifying waited for me in the backyard, and the mouse was the trick. I turned around and ran back to the front door, which was still open. When I entered the door, I realized that whatever was waiting for me in the backyard was already in the house. I don't recall seeing it, I just knew it was there. My next memory is feeling myself floating in the air with lights swirling all around me. Then it was morning and I was just waking from the couch, believing I had dreamed the whole thing. 30 years later, my mother was talking, and the subject of the old house came up. That she told me that she saw me floating in the air one morning with bright lights swirling around me. She could see me from her bedroom down the hall, and she was terrified and couldn't move. After some time, she gained courage, came to check on me, and I was sound asleep, back on the couch. She kind of thought she dreamed it too, but stated that she never forgot it. That's when I shared my experience. Haunted duplex in Donaldson, Tennessee. When I was going to school in Nashville, Tennessee in the mid-2000s, I lived in a 2-bedroom duplex in Donaldson, Tennessee. The other side of the duplex was occupied by the landlord's mother. She was elderly. I only saw her a few times the whole time I was there. The first night I stayed, I was reading on the couch in the living room facing the entry into the hallway. I was looking into the book, and I just kept seeing someone or something walk down the hall. When I looked up, no one was there. After a few times of this, I assumed it was shadows of cars driving by or something like that. So from my bed, I could see down the hall into the kitchen, and at night, if the door to my room was open, I would see somebody walking down the hall toward my room. I would get up, turn on the lights, and nothing. Needless to say, I was kind of spooked. I entertained friends a lot for parties and gatherings, and people would leave abruptly with no explanation. This happened a lot. One night, my partner was visiting, and we were listening to music in the living room. He kept staring at the entry to the hall. I could tell he was nervous. I said to him, "You see something, don't you?" He tried to brush it off, and that's when he told me he kept seeing a woman walk up and down the hall, and she was curious about what we were doing. I told him I had seen her too. Thought she was harmless. Later that night, when we went to bed, we were both awakened by loud noises. When I opened my eyes, I saw a green streak of light floating above my partner, and it quickly moved out of the room and disappeared into the hall. We both saw this. We were both so scared we left and got a hotel room for the rest of the night. The next day, we just kind of, stayed there until we had the courage to return. After that, never saw anything again. But I heard a woman's voice almost daily. It seemed to mock me when I was on the phone. Thought it might be my neighbor's voice traveling through the walls until I learned that she had fallen. Hadn't been living there for a few months. Whenever I'm in Nashville, I drive by this place and I'm always tempted to knock and talk to the new occupants. Never have yet. There is an entity haunting me. So this is actually crazy to me. I can't explain it. So when I was 16 years old, I was with this girl named Alexia. She was my first. We were together for 9 months, and one day while I was playing video games, I would usually call her and talk to her while I play. I made a joke to her and we both have a laugh. I swear, she says, "Who's there?" And I'm like, "Nobody." She FaceTimes me, acting all crazy, saying that she heard a girl laughing next to me. I showed her in FaceTime that there was clearly no one there. We ended up breaking up, and I always thought it was because she was semi-crazy. But this is where it turns sour. Later on, at 18, talked to another girl named Anna one day. I was laying down on my closet floor, and we used to talk for hours. One day I'm just chatting it up with her, and I make a joke that we both sort of give a chuckle, and I swear on everything. She tells me that she hears a girl laugh. I instantly got so scared because my thought of being just a crazy ex came to an end. I asked her, "Are you serious?" She says she swore it sounded like she was right next to the phone. She heard it perfect. After 3 months, we stopped talking. I then got with a girl named Indira. We were together for a year and was actually living together the entire relationship. We faced a bad money issue and were dead broke. I then heard about how Santa Muerte would help people talk to her and make her promises. So I sat up one night while Indira slept. It was pitch dark and I stared into the dark of nothing. I called out to her in my head. I saw eyes, but not just any eyes. They were like diamonds. 2-eyed diamonds that shined in pitch dark. Thought I was maybe starting to see black grain. I asked her for financial help, asked her to please help us and give her a bottle and her own sanction. I then fell asleep without any answers. We woke up, went to the bank, and I swear we had $3,000 that we didn't even know about it. We both got caught up in spending time trying to get back on our feet, and I totally forgot to get Santa Muerte my promise. 2 weeks after we found out about this money, talking me and my ex to the mechanic and get her new brakes and a new oil change, and drove 45 minutes on the highway straight all the way. The moment we drove to a bridge, my wheels locked sideways out of nowhere and slammed into the bridge, and the semi-truck fell off entirely, and we had hit the sidewall 4 times before we came to a stop. Everyone was okay, and we were all shaken up, though. Ended up thinking this was the work of Santa Muerte, feeling some sort of jealousy, or maybe even anger. Ended up getting a tattoo after me and my ex broke up over the Santa Muerte. Talked to her, telling her I was sorry, and got the tattoo for her to please leave me alone. That I'd wait for her to talk to me again. After that, I've been struggling ever since to hold down any girl or even a sneaky link at all. I just can't help but feel there's a girl entity that's ruining every girl I get with. Or it's all in my head. The Attic, 3-Headed Man, Old Man, and Mimicking. So this was back in 2008 through 2013, maybe. I was 8, and during Hurricane Ike, our apartment got destroyed. So we moved to Humboldt, Texas, suburban part of town in this cul-de-sac. The house was 2 stories. A lot more spacey than we were used to since it was just 6 of us kids, although some of us had to share a room. I was glad we had more than one bathroom. But our bathroom was down the hall, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night having to pee, and I'd have to walk in pitch black. So some nights I'd wake my brother up to come with me. I was kind of afraid of the dark, and he was 6 years older than me. But one night he didn't want to go with me, but I really had to pee. So I worked up enough courage to try to go alone. I opened the door to look to my right where the hallway leads the balcony downstairs, and I looked to the left where the bathroom was, which was also right next to my sister's room, and right between the bathroom door and where my sister's door was like something all white. It was sitting there. I stood there for a good 5 seconds looking at it, not knowing what it was, but I knew I didn't want to bother it. So I didn't go that night. Never told him what I saw. Time passes and my sister would say she'd always hear kids playing with the ball in the hallway in the middle of the night, and my mom summed it up to something in our attic. It was because every time we'd open it or something happens, there was this one time me and my brother and his friend were in the kitchen making hot dogs, and the foam that sits on top of the water whenever you cook it? Fucking foam morphed into the devil's face. But the mouth was open and it had 2 sharp teeth. 1 top, 2 at the bottom. That would be 3. My brother's friend noticed it and said, "Bro, that shit's creepy as fuck." It didn't bother me at the time. I was 8 and I thought it was cool, and my brother just laughed it off. There was also this one time I was at a friend's house, and this might be too much information, but I never like to go number 2 anywhere besides my place, because I need peace whenever I go. His house was the next cul-de-sac over, maybe 2 minutes walking distance from my place. So I went home and nobody was there. I was also getting a bit hungry. I decided to make a sandwich before I just sort of nuked my toilet. But I kept getting this strong feeling of something breathing down my neck to the point I couldn't take it anymore. So I brought the sandwich with me to the bathroom to finish making it to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Ew. But I put it in a napkin, and after I was finished, I sat there for a good 10 minutes trying to work up the courage to leave, but that feeling of hairs on my neck wouldn't go away. I said, "Fuck that sandwich." I left it in the sink counter and the napkin, took off downstairs back to my friend's house. I ended up moving due to plumbing issues to another house, maybe 5 minutes away driving distance during the summer of my 5th grade year. That house was no different, maybe worse, and I'll make this part as short as possible. One night during Halloween week, you know how they play scary movie marathons on TV, well, I was watching Friday the 13th in my room. I had this big white tiger I got from the aquarium sitting on a glass table in the corner that sort of, its tails all lifted up and flipped off the table. The tiger was laying on its stomach on all fours. No idea that happened. I didn't get scared, at least when it happened, but I knew I should be in that room to finish the movie, so I went to my parents' room to chill. My sister continued to experience stuff that she said was there, like a three-headed man looking through her window. But mind you, her room's on the second floor. We also had my niece with us she was 4 or 5 at the time. So when I go home from school one day, she was laying down on the floor coloring. So I laid next to her and she said, "Leave me alone." I said, "I didn't even do anything." She said, "Not you, him right there." I looked at nothing, and once again I felt like this isn't a place I should stay and sit. So I ran to the bathroom with my mom. That house was so cold when you exhaled you could see smoke coming out of your mouth. The final straw was when an old man woke my mom up and screamed at her to get out. Within a week, we was out of that bitch. It was like every house in the area was haunted. Literally all my friends either lived in the same cul-de-sac or the next one over, and my friend Chance's house. Apparently his name's Chance. One night we all slept downstairs in the living room, and his stairs would creak like a motherfucker. The way his stairs were set up is we were underneath, but we could sort of see if somebody was walking on them. His house was actually remodeled the same way mine was. His grandma was down there with us, and we were the only two still, awake watching TV, and we could hear somebody slowly walking on the stairs. Me and his grandma just looked at each other and didn't say a word. Then at my friend Christopher's house, he had a roller-up air mattress, apparently, in the upstairs game room. Once again, we were watching scary shit, Nightmare on Elm Street, or the air mattress rolled downstairs. We looked at each other, fucking ran. At my friend Jason's house, I was downstairs with his sister while whistling that old cowboy tune. You know, and it's a standoff, and something upstairs was whistling the same shit back to me. She looked at me and said, "Did you just hear that? Do it again." I did, and it fucking did it again. She wanted me to keep doing it, and I'm like, "Bitch, I'm about to leave you in this house. I'm not trying to start a duet with this damn ghost. This motherfucker's copying my whistle, same pitch and everything." Couldn't believe what I was hearing. Slightly confusing, but I think I gotcha. Very polite ghost. I used to live near a place called Battlefield. So back in the 1400s, a small conflict happened there, and now there's a church located in the middle of where the battle took place. One day my dad took me there, and as we're looking around, I see a tall man come up to me. Has like a full-on conversation with me. Told me about the church and the Bible. I looked around and my dad was in a different room, so I sit in one of the rows and keep listening. A good part of the conflict is that the church was attempted to set on fire but was put out quickly. And as I hear footsteps from the room my dad was in, I look up to him. It's the biggest frown I've ever seen, like inhumanly sad frown, and his clothes looked a lot more rugged and destroyed, now with patches and poor sewing. He looks down, the frown disappearing into like a smile at me. Frowns again, walks off to a room where they kept a perfectly preserved organ. My dad comes back to see me, and I start telling him about the man I saw. The organ room has no way out. I never saw him leave, so I take my dad to go see him, and he's not there. Gone entirely. He left quickly as he didn't really believe me. When we went back again a few months later, I swear I saw him, but I couldn't find him. I've been back multiple times and never found him again. However, after I did some research into the church, I find that when they attempted to burn the church down, 2 people were made to it died in a tunnel under the church that was supposed to be their escape route. But the end was blocked. One of their legs was burned, which caused them both to burn to death inside. Guess where that fucking tunnel was? It still is to this day. The fucking organ room. I keep telling my parents that I swear this man was real and no one believes me, and I'm skeptical myself as I was only about 7, but I remember every little word perfectly. If anybody wants an exact transcript, I'll happily put it in as a comment. An alien encounter in a weird family house. My older brother's not the kind of person that makes up some hoaxes about paranormal things, but this seemed incredibly weird and not real even to me. Basically, after some time he spent in the bar being a bit drunk, he for some reason decided to go deep into the forest. Perhaps somebody told him to do so, or he had planned this already. Worth mentioning that in the village we've lived in is allegedly located like a World War II German bunker, along with an old airstrip. So, he went into the forest, and as he stated, found an entrance inside the bunker. Inside he had seen maybe a white figure of a man. The figure left no tracks in the snow. Had a small talk with my brother. Decided not to tell anybody about what they had a conversation about, but everything he told us fit some bad things that are going to happen. And if I'm not mistaken, that happened before COVID, or at least at its start. That was so out of my brother's behavior. Nothing even close to that ever happened, and nothing similar happened after that. Indeed. Pretty sure my family forgot about this, but for me, it sometimes pops up in my mind. Once while sleeping, I started to hear consecutive knocks on the ceiling. These knocks lasted for different amounts of time, but had always been the same. They usually started at night, though. The worst thing about the knocks is that it usually makes it impossible for somebody to get into the attic, because our normal way inside was never built. Our only way to get there is to bring a ladder, climb into the roof, open a wooden lid, and squeeze inside. There's really actually nothing inside of the attic except a big water reservoir for an old water boiler that's placed in a different position from where the knocks have been heard. It never occurred before, and never after. My mom was called by her name in the middle of the night. That time we were alone in the house. It might sound very stupid, but that's what she told me the next day. In addition to this, once she was preparing and cooking for a birthday in the building that was separated from the main house, basically a kitchen. Stayed there till late night and then told me that she felt a very weird and sudden urge to lock the house and kitchen. After about 10 minutes, somebody started banging and pulling the kitchen door. Scared to think what could have happened if she didn't lock the doors. Also, all of us from time to time felt a creepy presence, especially my grandma, who went alone into the house and poured plants with water. That scared her so much, she felt that presence that she ran away outside and now doesn't go alone anymore. Perhaps it's somehow connected to the fact that the exact house is actually connected to all the bad things my mom ever had in her life. But who knows? Possible encounters from a Michigan nature park worker. For my own safety, I don't want to reveal which park system I work for, but it's important that the story, I'm a female 19 working a position at a Michigan nature park, not entirely dissimilar to that of a park ranger. My job duties usually include manning the entry booth, locking up the buildings at night, and although not a usual duty, sometimes they ask me to walk or take a park vehicle through some of the trails, as I'm on the younger side but still have several years of experience at the park. A relatively experienced outdoorsman. I've had some odd things happen to me. I can't quite explain them, things that happened while on the job. I'm decently well versed in some areas of the paranormal, and although not entirely relevant, it's of note that I'm also a Norse pagan as part of a family belief, and also wear protective symbols as well. To be honest, I've started wearing them more since these odd things have been happening. Tried looking into it myself, but Overall, I'm overwhelmed and I'm not sure where to look. So a friend suggested I ask a forum like this about my experiences. There's 2 things in particular I want to ask about. Here's thing number 1. I usually work the night shift, and this night in particular it was raining a lot and the conditions were getting unsafe. I was posted out in the booth, which is multiple miles from the office, so when things took a turn for the worse, my boss radioed me back. Some people who don't spend a lot of time in the woods don't realize how deep, dark woods can get, so I had both a flashlight and a light from the booth, which gave me probably 30 feet of visibility. When I went to grab my stuff, I went to lock up the booth, get in my car, and I swore I saw something that moved very human-like, but moved in a really odd way. Like the only way I can describe it is if a horse-deer hybrid tried to run like a person. There were no people out there, and it was most definitely not a deer. Probably not describing it the best way, but it was very off. I got to my car as soon as possible. Didn't start right away, a bit odd, but not entirely out of character for my car. But when I turned the key a second time, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It looked like whatever it was had gotten closer. The drive goes without incident, though. I'm still off about what I saw. That's when I get closer, I radio in to see if they need me to pick anyone up. Radio doesn't work right, which is very out of character. These radios are designed to work in awful conditions. I was the closest I'd been to any sort of signal in a while. Chalked it up to the weather and pulled into the office, but as I do, something runs past me. I didn't get a good look at, but it was not a person. And I'm telling you, there's not an animal in that woods that I know of that looks like either of the things I saw. I just can't seem to shake it. Thing number 2. This happened more recently, and is what prompted me to finally reach out to reform of some kind. I was walking the trails for security purposes. It was close to closing. We close around 11 p.m. and start a final walkthrough at 9 p.m. We do this to make sure that nobody's stuck on the trail or hurt, so they aren't stuck overnight when there's fewer staff and none of the patrol of those trails. So I was walking one of our trails, and I was pretty deep in the woods already. I'm a fairly fast hiker, and this is a trail I know well. It's already about 2 miles into the trail when things start to get weird. I hear a noise off in the distance, and at first I thought it could be a coyote or an owl, so I pressed on. Coyotes stay off the trails, though. Usually won't really go towards people unless they have dogs or... By the way, dogs are also banned in the woods here, so... But then the noises just got weirder. Used to the sounds of the woods, and I know the area and the wildlife very well, and I've never once in my life heard that sound before. It didn't come from any animal I recognize. It's most definitely not human. I've never boarded a sweep before, even when I've had coyotes nearby, but it didn't feel right and I got out of there. We're allowed to use our judgment in these cases. Creepiest army experience as of yet. This happened to me about a year ago in the army. So it's more or less still pretty fresh in my mind. It's not overly scary, but it did creep me out for a month or 2. For the most part, a lot of this could be explained as tricks of an overstressed brain. Being in a jungle and all, although 7 people seeing the same thing doesn't strike me as stress. On the very first night, my section mate, who's Malay, woke up to something pulling on his shirt and telling him slowly, "Don't disturb me again." This happened throughout the night and happened repeatedly. Creeped me out like hell, and due to the fact that every hour or so we'd wake up and ask if I heard it too. The following night, another of my section mates from Papua New Guinea, who's an immigrant. They were the sentry for my section. I spotted a black figure making its way towards where we slept. Immediately assumed it to be one of our commanders sneaking up on us to make sure that we had our guard awake. My mate loudly requested identification, actually screamed when it just jumped up the tree and grew right above us. We all woke up in time to see it practically Tarzan its way up the hill. Later, when we were tasked to sort of dig shell scrapes, we were assigned the same spot on the hill. 10 minutes into the digging, we found that right under where we slept, there was a huge slab of red rock that was considerably smoother than the earth around it. It turned out to be a tombstone of sorts, about a century back when natives still managed the island. The day after we found the tombstone, we had a navigation exercise that sort of had us as a section of 7 people. We were to find checkpoints all over the island. Technically, this isn't too hard to do. Almost like a scavenger hunt, except that the points were small slips of paper tied to 4 or 5 of the 1,000 trees on the island. We did manage to find all the checkpoints, though, but at the end we were faced with a 400-meter just dash through the swamp to reach back to base camp. What we didn't expect, though, was an abandoned cemetery in the middle of the swamp. The place was filled up to our knees with thick mud. One of my section mates fell into a spot that we think was a grave that covered him up to his chest before we managed to pull him up. There were bottles of ashes scattered around in a sort of sealed-up well that reminded me a lot of the ring. Now, this is all pretty ordinary standard, but what made it really creepy was that in the center of the swamp there was a patch of extremely well-kept grass, almost carpet-like, with this tree growing in the middle. My buddy muttered something along the lines of, "Get out of here before it's dark," and led us northwest. The supposed direction toward camp and towards the tree. I'm not exactly sure what happened after this because all of us seemed to experience different things, but my Malay mate heard somebody scream, "Why are you still here?" It was a few meters from him, while our signaler claims he saw a Japanese soldier hanging from one of the branches that was smiling at him. I personally seem to have the mildest experience out of those. Where the topmost branch was, there was a man and a woman sitting on top there. I always expected ghosts to look hazy or grayish, but these guys looked completely normal, like less than maybe 5 meters high in a tree in the middle of the forest. The rest of my section just claimed to hear the same crying that we heard the night before. We picked up our pace and practically ran past the tree and into our makeshift road. Might sound cliche, but at this point, our comm set, which had died for about an hour, somehow turned itself back on. We're hearing constant reports about how my section hadn't reported in yet, even though it was 2 hours past the allocated time. Funny thing was that we were in the swamp for less than an hour and a half at 2:30 p.m. When we exited, it was around 7:30. We obviously didn't report this to our commanders, but the time lapse was something that kind of rattled us. Deserved it. My 2 friends and I work and sometimes sleep in an army camp. Now, these 2 guys are jackasses. I say this because sometimes when there's others bathing, I like to be childish and turn off the lights and leave them off so others have to go out naked and turn them on again. Just yesterday, both of them stayed in while I went home. On the way home, I stopped by one of my friends' houses to pick up a spare uniform for him. I met his mother. They asked me if her son was doing something funny. Replied that other than being somewhat of a prick, not exact words, he was fine in my books. She explained the reason that she asked was that an hour before she went to sleep the night before, something whispered in her ear, "Your son wants to be like me," or something like that. I admit I was spooked, but as there wasn't any other related happenings, I just said thanks and I went home. Went to the camp today to pass my friend the uniform. We both started to tell me that they were just bathing yesterday when the lights started to flick on and off. They described hearing the switch flick up and down. It does make a pretty loud click. They were assuming somebody was just getting even. They shouted vulgarities, but they would hunt the guy down and pee in his boots. 5 minutes later, it dawned on them that the rest of the company was on an outfield training exercise for 3 days. The entire building was empty at the time. Since they were the only ones manning the office, kinda had a good laugh when I heard about it, though I'm making a mental note not to go to the toilet alone from now on. Odd office. Army camp. My office is actually based in an army camp, and for the past 4 to 5 months, weird shit's been happening on my floor, which is level 3. My boss's lights randomly turn on and off, which isn't such a big deal if the lights were actually faulty. We've double-checked them 8 times? Everything's been peachy though, and there's been a number of other events that work me up. 1. We keep our formation flag in one of the rooms in the office. One of my duties is to make sure the flag always looks unobstructed by miscellaneous items and to keep the surroundings free of obvious crime. As I was doing my rounds one evening, I heard somebody knock on the wall. Mind you, this is a solid concrete wall, so an audible knock's gotta be pretty hard. Swiveling around, I'm positive I saw a dude made out of a white fuzzy crap sort of peeking out at me from behind the wall. Noped out of there in 5 minutes, reported sick the next day. 2. I was doing regimental duties in the office next to mine about a month ago. That's when nature called. This happened around 11:58 and I was closing several of the books. Now the toilet is based outside around the curve of the corridor. When you open the door, you're met by a wall that doesn't connect all the way around to the ceiling, leaving about a quarter of the length empty. It serves as a partition to one of the cubicles. Well, as I was saying, nature called, so I had to rush out to the toilet to take a huge dump. Upon entering, I shit you not, pun not intended, there was a kid sitting on top of it. Didn't look like some of the grudge crap. The kid looked real enough. Couldn't tell what gender it was either. Besides those 2 occurrences, there had been minor things happening too, like hearing clapping while there's no one else in the office. Office computers logging themselves. My boss is convinced it's some Chinese feng shui issue. Maybe. A few stories I heard when I was in the army. Apparently, stories like these get deleted for some reason, so here I am again. I can't confirm if they've actually been proven true, except for 3, but some creep me the fuck out. 1. 1 week after enlisting, a soldier woke up in the middle of the night to pee. He'd almost got out of bed when he heard a ball bouncing outside the corridor. Fearing a commander prowling around, he quickly huddled back under the blanket and peeked out. What he saw was a small boy and his grandmother slowly moving from bed to bed and peering at the sleeping men. When they came to his bed, the soldier closed his eyes shut and pretended to be asleep. The boy looked at his grandmother and said, "Grandma, this one's still awake." Number 2. This actually happens periodically in my camp, though I'm not too sure what from. Every night there'll be a patrol circling the camp, 2 people per patrol. And what happened was that when the patrol was in the guard room preparing to switch with the next pair, a voice came from the radio reporting that the patrol had reached checkpoint 3. It's impossible because the patrol was in the guard room together with the commander. 3. This one happened to me personally. My friend and I were prowling at the outskirts of the camp. Along the fence that separated us from the forest, it was dark as fuck, so we all were there with our torchlights. As usual, we were discussing about nonsense to pass the time. All of a sudden I heard somebody crying softly from the forest. I attributed it to perhaps some muffled animal cries, but the sobbing was slowly building up with more woman-like screams. Creeped me the fuck out, and I dragged my buddy out of the pretense of needing to take a dump. 4. There's one about a soldier being woken up by his buddy, as per regulation, to accompany him to the washroom. He grumbles expectedly, but follows anyway. About 15 minutes later, he shouts at his buddy to hurry the fuck up. Guy replies back, "Not done yet." So he waits another 10 minutes, shouts again, and receives the same response. After another 10, he's had enough, so he practically climbs up the partition to shout at his face for wasting his time. What he sees is his buddy bending over the toilet bowl, slowly consuming the feces left inside. It's at this moment that his half-awake brain reminds him that his buddy had taken medical leave right before the lights out that night. Not wanting to antagonize whatever else was in there, he lights just says, "I'm gonna go back, okay? You're probably almost done anyway. To which his buddy replies, "You tired?" Gross. Southeast Asian stories from my family. To start off, I want to say that my immediate family follows Catholicism, thus the strong views on any sort of curses and magic. Our house had previous incidents in the balcony when I was younger, which prompted my family to paste a picture of the Virgin Mary on the glass doors. My aunt from my dad's side once came over to stay with us. She was never that right in the head, and my dad never liked her, but he still allowed her to stay with us, because they were related. She believed that she was an angel, and she could see into our bodies. She entered my house, she left her bags in the front of our indoor glass doors, going upstairs to see the room my dad prepared for her. Halfway up the stairs, they heard a loud shattering, causing all of them to run downstairs again. Right under the image of the glass was a perfect fist-sized hole, but no shattered glass, no object that could have caused the opening. My aunt's bag was under said picture, and upon opening it, my dad saw a large number of idols that did not belong to Buddhism, which he claimed to follow. According to him, the idols had some Buddhas which covered their faces with their forearms. Being a Buddhist before, he claims that any deity that hides his face usually hides unclean motives as well. Another one was about 30 to 40 years back, when the city I'm living in wasn't as built up. Back then they used to use these to cook, and for lack of a better picture, imagine a carved hole at the top of a hollowed rock. The inside keeps fuel, and on top goes to like a wok to cook. My grandmother was leaving her sister's house one day to go grocery shopping. As she passed the kitchen, she heard somebody whisper, "Psst, can we come out now?" She turned around and saw a young girl's head pop out of the stove, promptly disappearing afterwards. Apparently, during the Japanese occupation, young girls were hidden underneath woks and coconut husks in these stoves so the soldiers would not take them away. And the last one for tonight would be my grandmother's cousin. She had gone with my grandparents to the neighboring country to help with certain in-family matters. On the way there, they had stayed in a relative's place for the night, ready to leave in the morning. The moment the clocks had hit 3 a.m., she was screaming in several dialects and in Malay, all of which she had no way of knowing. Obviously controlled by something else, she had screamed at my grandfather when he questioned her strongly. She said that the original target was my grandmother, but as her husband, the grandfather's forehead had a shining light, she was protected. Was finally chased away with a combination of prayers and vulgarities. Odd combination, I know. Dad said something followed me back. Well, to start from the beginning, I've recently started working at this new area in my country that's famous for weird events. I kid you not, every single day here's like an ambulance blazing past at least some part of the day, or the bus is a couple of crazies either screaming or singing their lungs out. But yeah, off topic. The office I'm in connects to the toilet by a long corridor. The toilet itself, however, always leaves us with an oppressive feeling. In my third week, I was in there alone, facing a urinal against the wall when a shadow swept up behind me. Nowadays, this happens so... well, I guess you could just say it happens so often I barely register it anymore. But a few days ago, I went to take a colossal shit. That's when every other urinal, toilet bowl, and tap randomly went off despite this being a non-censor washroom. I've never wiped so fast in my life. Anyways, last night was the weirdest. Just reaching home, I opened the door and saw my father watching TV in the living room. Apparently, my dad saw somebody walk behind me into the room at the same time. But as it's quite a distance away, he assumed it to be a trick of the mind and just paid it no heed. After all, when he looked back next, there was only me there. I only heard about this one in the morning. Fast forward to 2 a.m. I woke up randomly because I dreamt of a small boy's white face showing up in my room. The next dream, though, had me running from black shadows in a fire-burned neighborhood, and I remember bumping into another survivor at a truck. I kept asking him to take me with him, since there's nothing better than this, but he refused adamantly, giving no reason other than "you're not supposed to come with me." Eventually we fought and I ended up taking his truck and drove off with him in the back. This morning though, I woke up with multiple points across my body that hurt like hell, as though I had serious bruises over there. Places like my shoulders, my shins, and my forearms felt like somebody hit them with a hammer and left. I'm not really sure how else to explain it. Even typing right now makes my shoulders kind of ache pretty badly, like I'm carrying a heavy backpack. My old house. This is more of a list of weird incidents that happened in my previous house. For reference, I live in Singapore, a Southeast Asian country, meaning Asian culture and beliefs are what the general populace follow. Also here in Singapore, most of us stay in government-built apartment housing. I say all this because when my parents bought the place long ago, we had a next-door neighbor whose job was being a Taoist medium. He had since moved out, but before my parents had seen him performing rituals along the corridors with chickens, dogs, and occasionally random women dressed in black. My mom swore she heard chains and screams from her room late at night. My brother and I would often have to spend the night at my grandfather's, and rituals taking place to prevent us from being too exposed to it. Anyways, like I mentioned, the guy moved out eventually and his daughter moved in. All-round good-natured family, all things considered. Nothing weird from them and very friendly. But even after he left and the ritual stopped, my family would continue to get disturbed by incidences that couldn't really be explained. I'll go chronologically. 1. As an infant, I would apparently stare at the balcony lights when they were off and scream like no tomorrow. According to my parents, I'd be inconsolable to the point the light screaming. Perhaps a child's imagination, though, who can tell? Number 2. My brother and I would often hear a woman sobbing and weeping in the corridor that led to our toilet. I would always begin around 2 a.m., but we never really had the balls to go check, and fell asleep eventually, so I can't really tell you what ended up happening. We would constantly see shadows gliding up the staircase into what would eventually be my room. We'd stare at them without blinking till they disappeared. Their behavior never changed. When I was 17, I had a friend over late working on a school project and it was pretty quiet, other than our small comments to each other when we were going to change. All of a sudden, we heard a knock on the coffee table next to us, and somebody male said loudly, "Hello, excuse me." My friend just stood up and said something similar to, "Well, it's late. Time for me to head back." And he did. I just booked it upstairs and dove into bed. My brother was alone one day in the house and decided to have a shower. While bathing, he heard my mom calling him from downstairs. It went something like this. "Can you come down and help me? I'm in the shower. It's really heavy. Just quickly come and take it." Okay. Towels himself quickly, runs down only to see my mom and my aunt just turning into the driveway. Clarified with him afterwards that no, she did not in fact say anything or come home for that matter till then. We would often hear footsteps running in the apartment above us, starting from as early as 9 p.m. till late into the night. They were definitely bare feet, but light enough that you could definitely mistake them for children playing. The closest way can describe it is that kids were doing their shuttle run practice and you could tell by the squeak their feet made and they pivoted around, but I once played Christian hymns when I heard it, in an attempt to sort of try to ward it off. Apparently the sound seemed to escalate, becoming like there were 3 kids instead of just 1. My brother, who worked as a real estate agent after we grew up, went to the house above, only the guys had checking if they wanted their house sold. No one was in, so he checked with some of his colleagues, and apparently one of them actually was actively trying to get it sold already. The owner's mom was supposed to live in that house, but due to mental issues was already sort of staying in a mental hospital for a long period of time. And no, she didn't have any young children in the house, and no, she didn't have any vigorous exercises due to her age. Anybody else have these sorts of premonitions? I don't dream a lot, but when I do, the dreams are usually very weird. Some even like premonitions. The last bit doesn't surprise me since I've always assumed I'm a sensitive, but I'll give some examples. I had a dream of a tower block burning in 2017. This was several months before Grenfell. In 2021, I dreamed of a strange entity in a petrol garage and seemed to be blocking entry. A month after this dream, a fuel shortage hits my country and people start going crazy for fuel when MSN starts talking about possible fuel rationing. Back in July, I had a pretty disturbing dream out of nowhere where I was being shot at by what seemed to be terrorists. This was before the attempted assassination of Trump and massive disorder in my country, including riots. In that month, I had a dream that I was evacuating an airplane that was blowing up. I was the last one to get off before it blew up entirely. I don't think it's like a premonition, but it's odd. It's because a singer I listened to died in a very similar accident. I've also had dreams of singing songs with perfect lyrics and being in places that I've never been in real life. I've had many other dreams, some of which are interesting and some make me wonder if they simply haven't happened yet. It's also worth noting that I'm pretty good at remote viewing, so I suspect I'm gifted. Does anybody else experience this? Not only like premonition dreams, but also random horrible dreams out of nowhere. I should probably try to make more predictions. Door closing by itself in a friend's house. This happened about 10 years ago and I was still in high school. I wanted to know your guys' thoughts because this experience is still something I can't explain. And I want to preface this story by saying that I'm not a believer in the paranormal, which is what makes this experience so confusing. So I'd like to have some time of logical explanation. When I was 17, my friend was living with another friend at his grandmother's house. He grew up in a rough home with an abusive and neglectful mother, so he experienced very unstable housing. He'd been telling me about some unsettling experiences that they'd been experiencing at the house. One was a display case of porcelain dolls that his grandmother had, and their heads would move by themselves. Another was hearing the sound of a music box playing during the night. They didn't own a music box. I was extremely skeptical of all of his claims because both were abusing drugs at the time, and both were taking high doses of cough syrup and getting high. Probably abusing other substances as well, so from this I didn't really believe what they were telling me. Then I had a chance to go over to the house. Went over there and the back door was open and closing by itself. Mind you, this is in the middle of summer in Georgia. There wasn't a gust of wind and nothing could have moved the door. There weren't any air vents above or below the door, but the air from the vents probably wouldn't have been so strong to move the door. No string pulleys or anything of that sort, just in case it was a prank or something. It was opening and closing as if a person was there doing it, but no one was. As unexplainable as this event was, it still wasn't enough to turn me into some type of believer in the paranormal. It would be jumping the gun to immediately ascribe an explanation to something that is unexplainable. What are your guys' thoughts? Unforgettable image of weird being. First of all, let me start by saying that I'm just some regular guy who thinks spirits are real, believe in God, yet never think about any of this crap or spooked by it either. If I hear a strange noise while sleeping, I ignore it and carry on. I honestly pay it no mind and go about my days, but something I witnessed about a year ago still bothers me till this day. I randomly think about it from time to time. It was a regular day. I was driving home at night. I was going down a residential street that's about a few blocks from my home, and I'd driven down that street like 1,000 times. Think of a 2-lane street each way, wide street with gated communities on both sides. I want to say it was about 9:30 p.m. at night. I was driving home from my son's baseball practice, and my son was sleeping in the back seat. I make a right turn into that street, and the traffic was a lot lighter than usual. If I recall correctly, there was one car quite far away coming my direction, perhaps 1 or 2 cars in the distance behind me. So as I'm driving down the street, I notice what appears to be a person walking on the sidewalk on my right-hand side. He's walking toward the same direction as I'm driving, so I can only see his backside. And I say his because it had the body frame of a male, as it was tall, lanky, and medium hair that reached shoulders. He was also wearing like a black hat or something like this. It was a skinny figure, black pants, black shirt. If I had to guess, maybe 6'4". I keep driving as I get closer to this person, perhaps 20-25 feet away. I was completely stunned. This person turned around and I saw my lights approach. It was a very quick and vulgar way, like somebody calls you over and over and you turn around and say, "What?" It was that kind of way. But let me tell you, whatever it was not human. Funny enough, the reason why I wanted to share my story is because I was scrolling through Reddit and saw the image of this subreddit, and it reminded me of the face I saw. It was very similar. It was not a mask, and if it was a mask, it was more real than what CGI can do in movies nowadays. It was this monster-looking face. It was alone on the sidewalk in an empty street. Turned around, saw me, stared at my car as I drove past it, and I looked in my rearview mirror and it had stopped walking and just stared. Immediately, my first reaction and thought to myself, aside from shock, was, "Dear God, what did I just witness?" And to this day, I still don't know the answer to that. Shadow people in my neighborhood. This all occurred while playing Manhunt with friends from school. We would play in my neighborhood, which is located in Central Florida. It was a 2v2, and we had to stay within the same 10 houses, so it wouldn't take us forever to find each other. All of our neighbors knew that we played, and they were kind enough to let us use their yards. Each yard was a little under half of an acre, so we had roughly 5-acre playing field. We always started playing at dusk, and we'd play for a couple of hours into the night. This was something the 4 of us would do every weekend, and occasionally had other friends from nearby neighborhoods come too. We played with the rule that had to physically tag each other, in order to be considered as being caught. This kept the game more interesting, as it was fun when you had to be able to get away and hide somewhere else. It's late, probably 10 p.m., my friend and I were walking down the side of the road, and a few houses down from us, we saw what we thought were 2 other friends who were seeking, but I remember tapping my friend and saying, "Look, they're over there in the bushes under the streetlight." My friend turned and looked and agreed. We could see 2 quote-unquote people crouching down hiding in this bush. So being that they were only a few houses down, I suggested that we walk toward them, but at an angle, so they wouldn't think that they'd been spotted. Once we get close enough, we'll rush them. We began walking at an angle toward them, and when we got roughly halfway to them, 2 extremely tall black figures that resembled the shape of a human stood up. They darted across the street at a very high rate of speed. Their legs moved like they were people running. They went under a streetlight and straight through a white vinyl fence. My friend and I stopped in our tracks, and both of us stood there for a minute in shock. And this all happened within 10 seconds. Ran back to his house, called our friends, tell them that we're done playing so they can come out. Once we told our friends who were hiding what we saw, we all agreed to call it for the night. Well, it was never the same after that night. Our days of playing Manhunt quickly came to a close. My friend and I's stories perfectly aligned, and we saw the exact same thing. It's been nearly 10 years and we still talk about it. Think of those beings very often. Now for the details that make this more eerie than it already is. These beings were definitely watching us. We could see them ever so slightly moving their heads as if they were trying to get a better look at us. I would estimate them at being 9 feet tall. As they watched us, we never saw eyes or any features whatsoever, just the silhouette and shape of what could have been best described as a human. Feet or hands, but they were so black you could see them in darkness. For lack of a better word or words, they were more black than black. It's like a void, and as they stood up, they were close enough that we would have heard the bushes move or their feet hitting pavement while running. There was no noise. As they ran under the streetlight, there was no shadows being cast. They darted straight through a white vinyl fence, and there was no opening or gate on that side. And again, no noise. This wasn't the last time I saw these beings in my neighborhood. 2 other sightings where I'm 100% sure that I saw them. always in the exact area of the neighborhood in which I saw them the first time. And anybody who's listening for the first time, thanks. See ya.